I'm Kevin Benedict, Senior Analyst for the Center for the Future of Work here at Cognizant, and I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I'm very excited today to have as our topic digital process acupuncture. And to begin, let me introduce you to our guest. Our guest, number one, is Prasad Satyavolu. Prasad, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Kevin. Looking forward to the discussion.
And Prasad is the Global Head of Innovation for Manufacturing and Logistics here at Cognizant. And our second guest is Rob Brown. Rob is the AVP for the Center for the Future of Work here at Cognizant. Rob, thanks for joining us today.
It's great to be back in the virtual studio of the Google Hangout with the esteemed Kevin Benedict, and really glad to be with Prasad to talk about digital process acupuncture in the manufacturing space.
Absolutely. So before we get going here, let's just find out where everybody's calling in from. Rob, where are you today?
So in the virtual studio, but coming to you live and in color from the San Francisco Bay Area.
All right. Prasad, where are you calling in from?
Today I'm calling in from Columbus, Indiana.
Columbus, Indiana. Well, again, thank you guys both for dedicating some time to talking about a very interesting topic here. Digital process acupuncture. What does that mean to us, Rob?
So, Kevin, when we think about any business process, you can decouple a process into its constituent piece parts, right? So maybe one process in your finance function is like an accounts payable, maybe a 6-step process. Or if you're a bank, your mortgage process maybe is a 15-step process. And Prasad's going to take us through, a lot of the industry-specific processes in the manufacturing space. And we look at digital change. I think a lot of times there's this overwhelming sense amongst a lot of the clients that we talk to that, oh gosh, now I need to, boil the ocean and digitize everything end to end. But we look at those step points in the extended process value chain, and we really look at those points and say, okay, if I, almost like real acupuncture, were to drop my resources into this one piece of that extended process value chain, can I get a positive ripple effect up and down that value chain? Where can I strike, if you like, within that extended value chain and get the outcome that I desire? And so if you think about the metaphor, like real acupuncture, it's very appropriate to think about sort of an agile approach to dealing with digital change in an extended business process and taking this approach. And our new research around digital process acupuncture is showing that the results are real, they're substantial, and businesses can really use this to get inertia as opposed to feeling overwhelmed that I've got to transform the end-to-end value chain from top to bottom.
Got it. Let me just pause you there for a moment. Ask though, do you see this as an interim step to a much bigger project, or do you think this can be the end all?
Well, I think it's a place to start, and so many of the customers that we talk to are wondering, how do I just break the inertia of business as usual? Where do I pick my spot to start, as opposed to, again, feeling like I've got to go all in, end all, be all on maybe a 2 to 3 year odyssey of digital transformation. Digital process acupuncture, and our research was showing that there is a positive ripple effect. So whether it's the end all, be all, it's a way of gaining quick wins, it's a way of gaining momentum, and it's a way of identifying sort of the adjacencies, if you like, in that process value chain to sustain the momentum and continue your journey. I don't think any of us that are now engaged in digital change would argue that it's a once and done, right? This is a journey that we're on. It's going to be sustained for the next 5, 10, 15 years, and so the key thing is to get started. And for those companies that are laggards and are going to continue to fall further and further behind, they need to realize that there is a penalty associated with being a laggard. So getting started is absolutely the thing to think about.
Got it. So Prasad, let me jump over to you there. So you're the Global Head of Innovation for Manufacturing and Logistics. How do you see this notion of digital acupuncture working within those areas?
So I would like to divide that into how the manufacturing world sees its processes and what is the center of gravity for them. How does that ecosystem looks like? And logistics companies look at their assets, their business process in very different way. In many ways, they are serving a big ecosystem. So the starting points for both the industry segments could be very different. For manufacturing, I see that product is always been the focal point. And in this digital age, the era of smart enabling the products and taking your portfolio through that journey makes a lot of sense. And what Robert was mentioning, what is your pressure point? What is that one intervention that can lead to a ripple effect? To me, for manufacturers, that is the product. And if you start with the product, you can really go all out and create and impact your customers' offerings, your customers' business processes, and also create new monetization opportunities, which can create a big ripple effect. So, product it is for me in manufacturing world.
Got it. So, Rob, let me ask you. You just conducted a big survey with executives around digital process acupuncture. What were you trying to really find in that report, in that survey?
We're trying to get a sense, first and foremost, of what the degree of impact would be by taking sort of this acupuncture approach to digital change. And what we found, one of the big headlines of the survey was, on average, across the respondent base, in terms of cost savings, companies were saving 8%, which is great, as a result of digital process change. Now, even better is in terms of revenue uplift. It was 10%. So you sort of add those two numbers together, 8% to 10, that's 18% top and bottom line impact as a result of doing that. So that's true capital gain. And that was in every industry that we focused on. And as Prasad said, if you look at the value chain, a lot of times with digital, the focus is on the customer, right? Customer facing, design thinking for the customer. But when you think about the extended value chain, there's other players in there that I would call a process constituent. So that might be your suppliers, your partners, even in terms of how you're harnessing talent to get to that end product that Prasad talked about. So the notion of the ripple effect across the value chain and the ecosystem, when companies talk about driving that outsized gain as a result of picking their spot, picking that point of pressure and closing gaps, shrinking friction points, and driving tighter integration, it's not just on the customer side, but also in that extended ecosystem of their suppliers and partners. And I think that's really exciting. And there was an analyst that said recently that if you use the analogy of an earthquake, the B2C impact of this digital process change is sort of like the earthquake, but the B2B impact is the following tsunami. And I think that's what we're starting to find on this notion of ecosystem, is that tsunami, that massive impact, is starting to come in the wake of the initial steps that companies might have taken just by focusing on the customer alone.
Wow. So in reading the report this morning again, Robert and Prasad, I noticed you used the term automation. A lot of things have to be automated today. But it seems like you're using automation perhaps in a different way than it used to be used. Can you help us understand what your current definition of automation is?
So I'll take a crack at that real briefly, and then Prasad, please chime in. But our report last year that we did, the Robot and I, looked at a lot of trends in just straight up what we call robotic process automation, rote, repetitive, using existing systems, existing processes, but literally using software robots to close those gaps, those latent gaps, just like a human being would do. When we think about digital change and digital process acupuncture in those multi-step processes, what we're really talking about is using Web 2.0 or SMAC-based technologies to fundamentally change the nature of the process itself, right? So sort of maybe jettisoning the old ways of doing things. So whether it's the instrumented process using Internet of Things, 3D printing, social, mobile, web-based technologies, as opposed to bailing together a kludge of old legacy systems, what you find is processes and process approaches that are born automated. The platform becomes the process, and it's sort of born automated from its inception. So that's where I start to see that divide from, well, we could automate the old ways of doing things with some of these overlays, but if we truly digitally change with an acupuncture approach, we're going to get a process that's fundamentally automated from its outset. And that's really exciting. And I think when you talk about trading cost for revenue on an 18% value gain, that's where a lot of companies are getting that value from.
Wow, what do you mean by where do you see automation being implemented, Prasad, in the manufacturing and logistics spaces?
So I'll take what Robert has said in terms of digital technologies and talk about convergence for a minute. I think convergence is that pressure point from which a ripple effect can be created. And when I talk about convergence, I'm actually looking at convergence in 3 dimensions. And we talked about it in a panel discussion in our Cognizant community, which was recently concluded. We talked about technology convergence, and that is information technologies coming together, smack set that Robert mentioned. Then there is business convergence, a lot of functional integrations, reorganization of functional silos is happening within the organization because CEOs are realizing that you cannot manage with traditional structures anymore. But the thing that I really want to talk about in the context of acupuncture and its equivalence in business systems is value chain convergence. And value chain convergences are creating new opportunities. And these opportunities come because you are looking at how can I look at digitizing and bringing information which is being created by a set of products. Take, for example, a truck manufacturer has many aggregates that go into making a truck. You have an engine, you have a transmission, you have tires, and if you go forward, then a truck manufacturer is selling it to fleets. And fleets are in turn serving distributors, different manufacturers, and retailers. Now, all of them have a common need, and their need is, where are my goods? That is supply chain visibility. How do you start that journey? How do you create a ripple effect in solving that issue on visibility? That's where it becomes important, that when you are smart enabling your product, each of the constituents in this value chain starts to focus on their product, creates infrastructure, where a common infrastructure perhaps, where you bring information from all these aggregates, then you begin to create value, because then a retailer can guarantee delivery of goods, can never run out of shelf space. So to me, convergence at the value chain level is one of the big strategies that organizations will have to think beyond the four walls of their organization. I also want to come back, Kevin, on the whole notion of what does the technology set from an automation standpoint evolve to on a manufacturing shop floor or in a logistics environment. But I wanted to establish this value chain convergence as a potential strategy to go forward.
Got it. Got it. So you're in the midst of all of this digital transformation, this digital process change. Where do you see it going over the next 2, 3, 4 years, Prasad?
So very interesting. And this is perhaps a good part for me to come back to, let's say, shop floor and talk about how the production environment is going to change. So in the United States alone, we anticipate that by 2020 there will be 7 million job skills shortage will be there. The total job creation in the manufacturing sector is expected to be plus 10 million, give or take a few thousands here and there. But if you see the skill gap that exists in the manufacturing sector, it's huge. So how do manufacturers cope with this? There is demand, there is opportunity, but you really need to take advantage of automation. In the manufacturing world, we are dealing with the physical. That means we have a need to use manual labor or work on nuts and bolts, work on parts. There are stamping, there are paint shops. Many of these processes have already been automated to a large extent. And that was robotics 1.0, if you may, starting 20 years ago. But if I see the evolution of how the next wave of automation will come, it will come with the digital technology. And you talked about, Robert, on the rote processes, repetitive processes. In the manufacturing world, we call it dirty, dumb, and dangerous.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how do I address the elimination of the dirty, dumb, and dangerous? When I am as a worker on the assembly line on a car, I need to weld on my shoulder body length on the top. I need to really go inside and do that aspect of fixing the bead. That's a dangerous task. It can have implications from safety standpoint. So the next wave of robotics that are being conceptualized is this about human robotics collaboration. That means I still need people to work the floor, and I need them to work collaboratively with robots. And robotics will not, or the next generation of robots will not take over the entire work of humans, but will collaboratively. So some tasks will be performed by robots and some work with humans. So that's the notion of the next generation of automation on the shop floor. And I think I'm seeing that in next 5 to 7 years, that's going to be the next wave of transformation. That's the point where some ripples can be created as well.
All right, so I'm going to ask both Prasad and Rob a question here that just came to my mind. When we talk about digital process automation or digital transformation, whatever word we're using at the time, what is really the end goal of that transformative process? Is it greater insight? Is it more data? Is it faster response? Or is it something else? So since I have you on the screen right now, Prasad, we'll start with you, then we're going to jump over to Rob.
Sure. End goal of every business is to be profitable and sustainable, profitable growth. Any transformational effort cannot not serve that goal. That's the raison d'etre for businesses. So digital transformation, I see that as a paradigm which will help organizations meet this challenge. Why is this so important? Because we are talking about creating experiences for customers, for consumers, which will redefine how businesses are serving the customers and consumers. Therefore, the intermittent goals, or I should say the journey on digital transformation is about a very sharp focus on what experiences we are creating for people who are in the work, who are within the enterprise. How are they executing their work? Is it a positive experience for them? And for the consumers of the organizations, our customers in the B2B area, what's their experience? I think there can be many other transformational goals, particularly in B2B segment, but the single most defining factor which stands out for me from digital standpoint is experience.
Got it. Okay, Rob, what's your view on that?
So I think I largely agree with everything that Prasad said around got to have it be profitable, you got to have it be sustainable. What's interesting is that so many companies that when they hit the Great Recession, we're almost coming up on 10 years now since 2008, and so many companies cut and cut and cut and cut in terms of cost savings and really applying lean principles to their organizations, their processes. At a certain point, I think a lot of companies kind of cut to the bone. And so now one of the things that has really become quite apparent with digital is how do we not just cut, but how do we open up new pathways to revenue? And so again, on this notion of trading cost for revenue on the top line, the bottom line through digital, that opens up a lot of exciting possibilities. And so, Kevin, you asked about, is it about speed? Is it about information? Is it about customer intimacy, brand awareness? I think it's all of those things. But the lifeblood now of a digital organization is the information. And Prasad, you talked about dirty, dumb, and dangerous, and I'd add one more. And I think about certainly manufacturing and logistics. The fourth D is documents, right? There's paper-based documents all over the place. Now, you can talk about just rote and repetitive automation. You can take documents out of the flow and do scanning and so forth. But in a digital world, something that you think about where's the needle, in an acupuncture approach? Is it because you added an RFID tag to the box or the container? Is there a transponder instrumented in that extended supply chain to more tightly couple together that value chain? It could be all of those things. And even if you look at things like global trade management, it's one of the most old school document. And I know a guy in in Rotterdam. I'm going to place the call. Are the containers available? Yeah, maybe. I know they're booking all kinds of ghost shipments in there to make sure there's container space available. What if you digitally changed? And it's happening right now. It's already happening, and that part of the manlog space is going through quite a bit of digital change. So there's the supplier coupling that we talked about. There's the information back to the customer. I mean, why is it? If you look at just talk about manufacturing, maybe a subsegment, the CPG industry. Why is it that if I'm a fan of Cheerios, I like General Mills, Cheerios product. Why is there still like store own brand knockoffs of Cheerios? Or whatever your favorite cereal might be. Pretty quickly in the next 5 to 10 years, through customer intimacy, CPG companies with things like Amazon delivery, drone drop shipments, it could be that CPG companies completely disintermediate the retail sector. Now, there's a lot of debate right now as to whether the supply chain will be able to stand up to that level of scrutiny. But you look at things like what Tesla is doing with their manufacturing and disintermediating dealerships. You're going to start to see this notion of the ripple effect of digital process change will materially shape, reshape, and reform industries and value chains as we know them today. And so I think we're just hitting the tip of the iceberg, but there's more to come on this story for sure. So it's not just the profitability sweepstakes, it's how do you completely recombine some of these process approaches to get to your routes to market.
Well, that's fascinating. So the entire competitive landscape is moving, and you have to pay attention to that because it can change everything very quickly.
Well, we talked about speed, and Prasad, I'd love to get your perspective on this, but the speed principle, in a world now where I can sit at this desk and get just about anything that I want or need for my household from Amazon, and versus going, I have an Ace hardware store about a mile down the road. I could jump in my car and go down there, but it's the fact that I can get that part much faster, easier, with less steps, less friction points. I know it's in stock. That speed principle of getting me the thing that I need, I think, is also a big part of this notion of knitting together the digital value chain in the manufacturing space.
Yeah. What's your thoughts on that, Prasad?
Yeah, experience is the new driver of business. You are having that great experience without having to go through friction, Robert, because you are able to do that very seamlessly, very effortlessly, without having to spend your personal time and energy. Something that you can create a personal experience, a lifestyle experience. Use that time for that. It's very interesting that when we talk about speed, when we talk about digital, and how organizations can be more agile, in this day and age, you come across examples where there are documentation, contracts, which run into pages and pages. Not only that, in every supplier interaction, for example, in an automotive value chain, an automotive supply chain, you are looking at drawing up of contracts which are very different supplier to supplier. One can imagine why, but then they're all paper-based. And if there is a legal dispute, then you are having to scan all the documents by word to find out what you can do with it. What is your angle for protection? What is your angle for recall side? If there is a recall on the product side that you see so often, you have an issue on tracking that through the entire supply chain and finding out, just where the mistake happened and how do we correct it? How do we prevent it? Now, if you extend the notion of speed and agility towards creating a superior experience, you need to look both sides. You need to look at what's the customer interface and how we are making that a very seamless experience and a smooth experience, a great experience for consumers and customers. But on the other hand, you have to deal with a lot of bringing to life of product issues, if I may. And that requires for you to have trusted relationships. What I find very difficult to digest, even in this day and age, is the supply chain relationships are having a trust deficit. And that trust deficit is fundamentally emanating from the fact that who owns the intellectual property? Are we sharing the gains of this equally?
Yeah.
Are we shortchanging some of our partners? So these kind of questions obstruct the progress towards realizing full benefits of digitization or going pure digital. I think so. We need to. My submission was we need to look both sides. We need to look at experiences. We need to look at our supply chain to see how we can create great experiences and enjoy our work on both sides of the house. And that's the reason I put experience as the number one benefit that we should create from digital.
Got it. So I know you also said you started talking about profit and identified that early on. I'm going to move over to Rob here. And Rob, let's talk about, in your research, you saw both top line and bottom line impacts from doing digital process change. Talk to us about what you found there.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, again, the big headline was sort of, the 8% revenue gain, 8% cost takeout and 10% revenue gain. Quite interestingly, in our research, it was pretty uniform across industries. The one big laggard, maybe surprising or not to the audience, was the healthcare sector. Definitely lagging behind other spaces. I think that there's probably been less of a forcing function in healthcare so far compared to retail or banking or insurance. So definitely a sort of a laggard's approach there. But interestingly, one of the questions that we asked in the research was, as Prasad has been talking a lot about, how well were you able to knit together your extended value chain? And by and large, about 2/3 of all respondents agreed either strongly or very strongly that digital process acupuncture resulted in them better being able to integrate their extended value chain. So that's quite an interesting finding. And we've talked a lot about many of the terms that are out there, whether it's Internet of Things, whether it's 3D printing, whether it's robotics, either at the shop floor or virtual software robots. There's a lot of buzzwords out there about digital right now. But they all kind of point to the same thing, and that is to say that code, as opposed to manual effort, are knitting together processes like never before. And the last thing that companies want to do, again, is sort of pay that laggard tax by not getting going. And so the acupuncture approach of trying a pilot, see how that pilot drives that impact, and from there, we are seeing the impact of ripple effects up and down the supply chain, as opposed to, again, sort of a waterfall-based approach where maybe I'm going to try to boil the ocean in a 2 to 3 year initiative, and then, fingers crossed, hope that I get that outsized impact. So the time is now to get going, and as we say, a lot of companies out there are already reaping the benefits from taking these steps.
Yeah. So Robert, interesting point, very interesting point. And when you talk to manufacturing companies, practically every evolution of our integrated system evolved from manufacturing. For example, manufacturing resource planning, ERP. But if you take these projects, you are entering into, for a large global corporation, a 2-year blueprinting phase.
Yes.
And then another multi-year global program before you ever achieve nirvana and realize the benefits. So, and there are strategies that you can do to speed track, fast track these projects. But really, digital acupressure or acupuncture is not about large-scale programs, isn't it? That's what you mean.
That's right.
The benefits that you can gain by doing a digital project in a very sharp, focused, agile way can far outweigh large-scale waterfall methodologies that have been in vogue for years together. Is that the point that you are trying to bring home on?
I think, well, and here's another way of looking at it, Prasad. Again, if you think about sort of the industrial value chain, as we've all, in our professional careers have grown up with that notion of process, and ERP is actually a really, really good example of that. If you look at the process steps, to get from, point A to point E, you have to go from A to B to C to D to E in an industrial value chain. And I think what's exciting about digital and the notion of digital process acupuncture is, in a digital world, it is entirely possible to short circuit all of those middle steps through digital change, because, Kevin, as we talked about, they're sort of born automated. And so it's not just process automation, it may be, not to overplay it, but process obviation that digital makes possible, to use a shorthand, sort of the Uberification. Everybody uses that word, love it or hate it. You can collapse and drive new ways of integrating not only your process but your value chain, and that's really exciting. And so again, acupuncture as a shorthand to describe something of pick your spot, don't have to boil the ocean, start somewhere, identify that pressure point where it is most likely you're going to get that outsized value gain. Ripple effects can, will, and do happen, and that's what our research showed, and that's what's really exciting about where we find ourselves today.
Wow, early on in my career, I worked as a IT manager at a big electronics firm, and we were trying to do just-in-time manufacturing using just-in-time inventory principles, etc. But the just-in-time was all spreadsheet, and it meant somebody had to be standing on their toes checking spreadsheets in real time because there wasn't any code connecting those together. And it was a limiting factor that was a huge competitive disadvantage. So Prasad, let me move over to talk to you, because you spend a lot of time on the front lines of manufacturing logistics. Where are you seeing these kind of just places time and time again where it's a good place to start with digital process change? Where do you see that in your discussions?
So it's, for us, the way we are looking at our engagements and looking at where could be the biggest bang for the buck. I classified this into 3 categories. I'm saying it inside, around, and beyond. Now, what does that mean? Inside the product. And I will move from physical to digital and digital to physical. How it is impacting. I rented a car, and as I was driving it, I realized that how many of the mechanical features in a car are getting eliminated by display and touchscreen. To a great extent, that is also disintermediation. It's a disintermediation of physical material. The needle, a mechanical speedometer, is completely replaced by a digital display, consequently eliminating the need for manufacturing of plastic and plastic needle, which used to move ever so slowly. So, I will do that. So it set me thinking, and I was correlating it to what a huge change inside the product. So you bring digital to life inside the product by adopting technologies, taking the mechanical components away. Robert, you talked about Tesla. Over-the-air updates are adding features to the product which were thought impossible at some point of time. You could practically reconfigure, solve problems over the air digitally. So that's inside the product for us. And I see that as one of the pressure points, acupuncture points. If I go outside, and that's why the classification, inside, outside, and beyond. So outside the product, you have this whole network of partners, entities, business processes that are getting executed with data that is either coming from the product that you have manufactured or from other open data sources. All of that intelligently analyzed and insightfully pushed into the consumption media, such as mobile devices of the consumers, are absolutely creating new points. For example, many of the manufacturers are looking at how can I use locational intelligence to provide a better experience to the customers. For example, if a plant manager, and this is, I'm taking it outside the realm of product, plant manager can get real-time visibility into what's going on in the plant, which machine is down, which part of the assembly line did not meet its quota, which batch got rejected, and I have the controller function on my phone to actually stop the line from my phone if a batch goes above certain threshold limits. So to us, those are the points which can create tremendous value outside. And then when we talk about beyond, that's the realm of behavior, consumer behavior, customers. Where do they see value? How can they get benefits of a relationship with you? And that requires design thinking. That requires studies on how people behave in real world. How do they use their products? And digitization is actually helping in better understanding of that. Take, for example, the driving of a car. Today, with telematics data, I can actually know what's the driving pattern in LA, if you are going from Torrance to Venice Beach on those roads, or if you are on New Jersey Turnpike. The contextualization of that information is readily available to me. That tells me how the vehicle is driven in those parts of the world. Therefore, how can I create soft features that can go in and impact the experience? I spoke of examples that are more towards the product usage and running of the operations. There are possibilities that exist in automation, which I can come back to in purchasing processes, in material requisitions, as well as managing contracts, managing intellectual property. All of those processes have huge inefficiencies which can have tremendous benefit from taking initiatives in digital.
Got it. So we thank you for sharing that too, Prasad. So all of these things for us that are involved in IT and high tech and in strategy and consulting seem quite obvious. Like, why doesn't everybody just drop everything they're doing and digitally transform their companies? But in the real world, there's challenges and obstacles and resource constraints and time frames and budgetary priorities, etc. What are some of the biggest obstacles and challenges you're seeing out there today that are preventing companies from just jumping on this and just maximizing the efficiency of their operation?
Can I jump in first, and then Prasad, I'd love to get your perspective from the practice. So, Kevin, you know that one of our colleagues in the Center for the Future of Work, Ben Pring, wrote a blog piece about the #1 bestseller, or one of the #1 bestsellers last year in the United States was Marie Kondo's book, The Japanese Art of Tidying Up. And the premise of that book was it's very, very difficult for people to throw away the stuff in their households, their personal households. They're accumulating things. And the metaphor he used was it's very apt in the business context too. Your question, what's preventing companies from making the shift, is they've built up a lot of stuff on the old ways of doing things, sunk assets, business as usual, and that's really preventing, I think, a lot of process change today. Now, I think that's going to change very quickly as approaches like digital process acupuncture or agile methods, experimentation in laboratories will lead to this notion of good things can happen on a ripple effect across the value chain. I will say that, going back to the white paper again, the biggest obstacle that we found in our digital process acupuncture research was data security. And Kevin, it seems like every one of these surveys that we run out of the Center for the Future of Work, when we ask about obstacles on the future of work processes, data security is #1. And in fact, a close second, I'm looking at it right now, was data security, data quality, and data access. And then, and only then, did it get down to things like number of process steps or capabilities for internal change? So I think, if we talked about this earlier, Prasad, the lifeblood of manufacturing and logistics companies is that information, right? Removing the dirty, the dumb, the dangerous, and yes, the document intensive to get that frictionless data flow. But very clearly, a lot of obstacles are still fixated around data security and quality, believability as an obstacle to, jettisoning the legacy and move to new ways of doing things. If it's not secure, it's still perceived as something to be a potential threat for the business.
Wow, Prasad, what's your thoughts on that?
I think I agree with what Robert was mentioning, but I would add the organizational structures element to it and the component around learning. I think it's very important for chief executives to address how do you create an organization which learns continuously. So how do you create these knowledge loops which are agile, with people exchange knowledge which is buried 5 deep, 6 wide in the organization? And this is another way to tap into that immense tacit knowledge that you have in the organization. So one of the greatest resources that organizations have today is knowledge, and it's really difficult for them to tap into that knowledge base. Therefore, one of the key transformational engines for which could also overcome several obstacles is how do organizations move towards knowledge-centric, knowledge-based enterprises and create mechanisms which not only protect the knowledge that the organizations have, but also create a culture of learning. Many times we see examples where the exchange of ideas, exchange of thoughts, and this whole notion of, I can do only one part of this whole thing, but there are several others who may be knowing better or may look at the problem differently. That kind of collaboration and exchanges that culturally prevents organizations from taking advantage of that. While Robert spoke about a lot of data aspects, I thought I will add some of the softer aspects of organization culture and strategies for harnessing the knowledge, which will complement the obstacles that you mentioned.
And Prasad, just to echo on that, Kevin, it's such a great point. Like that institutional knowledge, how do you tap into it? And I think for a lot of customers that we talk to, there's a fear factor of experimentation and deviating from business as usual as in somehow a career limiting act. How can that experimentation take place in in laboratory environments? Where can you play around with some of the new tools that may be, a transponder or RFID or instrumentation of the assembly line in a way that will lead to those breakthrough thoughts and ideas. And I think that mindset is in some ways holding people back too. And the work that we do at Cognizant and places like our collaboratory space, inherent in that name, collaboration in a laboratory. It is a space that's dedicated. It's a safe space to do that type of work. And I think you'll see more and more companies even developing their own internal collaboratories to start at that level. And Prasad, I'm sure some of your customers that are really forward-leaning in some of those initiatives to spend that money to get to those breakthrough insights, to shake up the old ways of thinking about processes.
In fact, Robert, what we are doing is we are encouraging that thought process. The way we are helping organizations build capabilities so that they can really take advantage of the opportunity that exists before them is to create centers of excellence, which are very agile. They do not fear failure, open to experimentation, and we are helping them create the ecosystem of partnerships. It is not about internal collaboration alone. It's also about crossing the boundaries and looking at the larger ecosystem and how do you take advantage of that. So we have built a big and very effective digital ecosystem as part of our work in Digital Works. And therefore, our attempt is we let our clients take advantage of the ecosystem that we have built in, in the process, help them develop capabilities and centers which will take experiments to the next level, be bold enough to do some of these, change their processes in how they design next generation of products, offerings, and the digital products. Now, manufacturers are beginning to see opportunities beyond the physical products, the data and insights-driven products, which could completely change the game for them. So, but it's not easy making that transition. Therefore, digital process acupuncture. Therefore, finding a point which can start that ripple effect. So these are all the enabling mechanisms which will help organizations move to the next level and be the front runners in this opportunity race.
Got it. Now let me just ask, probably Rob, let me go over to you. We talk a lot today about this white paper and the research you've just conducted. Where would somebody be able to get that, and what's it called? What should they search on, or where should they find it?
Yeah, so a great question. Literally, Google search bar, digital process acupuncture. Pull the white paper up. We just released the video. That's available on YouTube as well. It sort of gives you the 3-minute whistle-stop tour conceptually of what it's all about and some of the highlights of the research. And then, of course, all of our blogging that we do, Kevin, you, myself, our colleagues in the Center for the Future Work at www.futureofwork.com.
Very good. And I want to thank the two of you, Prasad, Rob, for joining us today here from the Center for the Future of Work. And I want to thank all of you viewers for sticking with us. Thank you again.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Prasad.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Robert.